UK police are investigating a Scottish Reform councillor after she dared to say she was, quote, born and bred in the UK. Apparently it's very offensive these days to call yourself a local.
And it's scary as a local resident, somebody who was born and bred here. I shouldn't have said that.
Well,
yeah.
Do you see why this is? People
Yeah.
sometimes think that Reform are very much against having people
That just
here.
came out. It just came out.
That's unfortunate for you, I guess, but ultimately, do you see why people who aren't from here, who have maybe made their home here, are annoyed when they hear an elected official say that people are born and bred here?
Joining us is Spiked Online editor Tom Slater. Tom, welcome to the program. Now, we talked about this incident last week, but things appear to have developed. There now seems there'll be a police investigation.
No, it's escalated to an even more absurd degree. There's apparently a 22-page dossier which has been handed over to Police Scotland as well as the council's regulator, alleging that this Reform councillor essentially engaged in a form of hate crime when she said something which no one other than a handful of people in the Scottish media elites could possibly take offence to. To say that it's absurd to say that being born and bred somewhere is some sort of racially aggravated form of hate speech really doesn't cut it. The fact that that councillor in the moment in that interview almost expressed regret for having said something so simple and so pedestrian tells you how bad things have gotten in this country. And also I think tells you that a lot of the time kind of hate speech law, hate crime law is just being willfully weaponised as like a tool of political censorship, as a kind of political weapon. So I really hope this is kicked into the long grass. I really hope that when someone properly looks at it, they realise that this is absurd and politically motivated. But I wouldn't put anything past our police forces these days, to be honest.
No, gosh, nothing surprises us anymore, really, Tom. That's where we're at. Now, look, the White House has warned the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer that Britain's failure to prosecute two suspected Chinese spies risks damaging the relationship and could actually jeopardise intelligence between the two. This comes as charges were dropped against two Britons accused of spying for the CCP. Tom, why is Keir Starmer appeasing China?
There's a hell of a lot of questions around this, Danica, and rightly so. So this trial collapsed after the government essentially didn't provide the sufficient evidence that China was a national security threat. You then saw the proceedings against Chris Cash and Christopher Berry completely end. And there's been a lot of questions that have been raised about why this took place. The CPS, our Crown Prosecution Service, has directly accused the government of essentially allowing this trial to fall. There's obviously the broader context, which is a Labour Party very keen to be seen to be doing business with China, allowing them to build a giant super embassy in the middle of London and hoping that with our economy in the doldrums, that a bit of Chinese investment will help the economy start to tick along again. So the fact that now you've got the Americans getting involved, as they have done many times over the years, to suggest that you're really going to damage your intelligence relationship with us if you continue to cozy up to Beijing, it really puts the government under pressure, I think. If this particular case wasn't a little bit complicated, didn't take a few minutes to explain, it could easily be something that would bring down a government. And I think the more evidence that we see come out, the more murky details that we see emerge, it could become a much bigger problem for Keir Starmer than it has already.
We'll certainly watch that one over the coming weeks. Tom, we wanted to ask you about a couple of RAF surveillance planes being deployed on 12-hour missions to patrol NATO's eastern frontier. The aircraft flew 16,000 kilometres, starting from the far northern Arctic region, right along the Russian border past Belarus and Ukraine. The threat of war with Russia continues to exercise British minds.
Absolutely it does. And our participation in this 12-hour exercise underlines that. This was obviously in tandem with our NATO partners, obviously backed up by the US ultimately, and in response to those series of incursions, whether or not they're accidental, whether or not they were a show of force of Russian drones into Romanian airspace and so on and so forth, is a sort of reminder that those kind of roiling tensions over Russia and Ukraine will continue, even as it seems like the war continues to be kind of bogged down in that particular region. I mean, it's a sort of reminder as well for the UK, I think, that we do live in increasingly uncertain times. And yet, whilst it's great that we managed to spare two RAF surveillance planes to take part in this, our own kind of domestic military and air force is still pretty much withering on the vine. So as ever, you get that contrast with the kind of much more dangerous times that we find ourselves in, but in the UK in particular, still a lack of seriousness from our political class about making sure that we are ready for this more unstable era.
Yep, it's the same here in Australia, Tom. We appreciate you joining us as always. Thanks so much.